we should perhaps not be desperately surprised with the line taken by Mr Peskov, in the sense that it is exactly what Vladimir Putin has been saying, what their ambassador to the United Nations has been saying. When presented with evidence, they simply hold up their hands and say, nothing to do with us.
Well, it's not true, is it? And I think they're very good at fake news, and we just need to know that what we're saying is correct. We have journalists who are disciplined and thoughtful and make sure that they have clear sources, and we just have to carry on telling the truth. But more importantly, gathering information so that when the time comes, we can take out prosecutions against the relevant people. We must hold them to account for the war crimes that they're obviously committing. And I mean, the truth is that the evidence that we have at the moment is just the tip of the iceberg, I fear, because we're only seeing it from the towns and villages where the Russians have withdrawn. There are many other towns and villages where the Russians are still in occupation, and we just don't know the full extent of the horror in those areas.
But just in terms of prosecuting war crimes, and certainly people wish to establish what actually has taken place in various parts of the country, but given Russia's relationship or lack of relationship with the ICC, how is it possible?
You can have a special tribunal, basically. That's what you can do. And, where there's a will, essentially. I mean, remember, people couldn't believe that we would ever be able to hold the murderers in Yugoslavia to account, and yet we did in the end. And we got most of the major players, stood trial rightly and are now behind bars rightly.
In terms of what we have seen from NATO in the past 24 hours, there feels like there has been an escalation. NATO has agreed that they will be providing heavier weaponry. Are you entirely comfortable with that, given the reason that we have held off up until this point was the suggestion that Russia might declare as a party to the war?
Well, so I think where we've reached at the moment is we've reached a stage whereby the Russians are to a certain extent withdrawing, but they're not defeated. They're regrouping, they're recalibrating, and I fear they're coming back. And what we need to do is use this opportunity to regroup, recalibrate, reorientate ourselves as well. I think some people hoped that we would be able to, that the war would be stopped fairly quickly, that we would stop the Russians in their tracks and this would be the end of it. And by now, the Russians would be making their excuses and leaving. Obviously, that's not happening. So I think that what we need to do, and it is right that what we do, is we redouble our efforts now. So if there is anything left, and there is, on sanctions, we need to make sure that we are really pushing. We're going the whole hog on that. But also, I think we need to make sure that we are supplying the weaponry that the Ukrainians clearly are asking for as quickly as possible.
But just specifically on the way in which the United Kingdom has been helping.
Yes.
Homes for Ukraine scheme. I think we've got, only perhaps as many as as few, I should say, as 500 Ukrainians welcomed here to the UK 3 weeks on from the application process opening. Understandably, there are logistical difficulties. I think everyone understands that, and particularly in getting a scheme up and running pretty quickly. But what would you be doing differently right now?
First of all, I wouldn't be as generous as you've just been, because what I would say is this, is we knew for some time ahead of the Russians, invading, that it was going to happen. And what we've done in other crises is that we've had specialised schemes, so focused on, like in Hong Kong or Afghanistan, we had special tailored schemes for dealing with the refugees that were bound to come and bound to be. And we should have done the same with Ukraine. But instead, we had the Home Office kind of putting their fingers in their ears and saying, la, 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 la. And as people were coming across the border, they were still resisting it. I mean, you will remember, the Ukrainians being told you can pick fruit if you want to come into the UK. I mean, really insulting. And we should have had a proper scheme ready to go. And, everything. And although slowly they're getting into the right place, it's kind of, there's such resistance. We had a time only a few weeks ago when poor Ukrainians were trailing around Europe trying to find a British embassy in order to go into the right place to fill in the paperwork. Now at least it's online, but it's still really cumbersome. So we really do need to have a better system than this. What we've always said is that people should be able to come here, but once they're here, we need to make sure we have a record of who they are and where they're going, particularly in order to make sure that we safeguard the children.
Can I ask you about Rishi Sunak, indeed about Rishi Sunak's partner? And I wonder, do you have any sympathy for the situation in which she finds herself in? I mean, you are someone who, has been involved in criticism about the wealth of your partner as well at some point. The situations are not parallel because, of course, she has non-domiciled status. But I just wonder whether or not the private lives of politicians' partners, you might see that as perhaps being the line is perhaps slightly becoming blurred in this story.
So first of all, just so that there's no kind of misunderstanding about this, my husband's a judge. Everybody knows that. He's been knighted because he's a judge, and therefore I could call myself Lady Nugie. I don't. It's a well-paid job. He's a public servant. He pays all his taxes. If you are a minister in this country, you need to declare not just your own financial interest, but also that of your spouse, in order to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest. And it seems to me that there is a clear conflict of interest here, because the Chancellor of the Exchequer is responsible for the rules on non-doms. He has a wife who has decided, and she made a positive decision, to become a non-dom, which meant that she doesn't pay tax on her worldwide income, but only on her income in the UK.
So is Labour currently advocating for non-dom status to be removed?
No, what we're saying is that what she's done is perfectly legal, but whether we think that it's fair, given that her husband is expecting so many of us to be making so many sacrifices, he's increasing taxes, 15 taxes he's increased, he's expecting us all to pull our weight, but not his partner. But
isn't he true then? Isn't he accurate then when he says in The Sun, says to Harry Cole that the Labour Party is using his wife to get to him? I mean,
no.
That is what's happening.
No, because he should have declared that his wife was a non-dom, because he's responsible for the rules on non-doms. So if there had been a discussion in the Treasury about, I mean, let's say you look at this particular example or other examples of non-doms, and if you look at the details, it does seem a bit odd. Sometimes, I mean, like, she's been here 8 years, she's got kids, she's living in Downing Street and in a taxpayer's flat, but she's not here as a permanent resident. I mean, it does seem odd. So it may be that they may have had discussions in the Treasury about updating these rules, making sure that they're more relevant. Would he have been involved in those discussions? He shouldn't have been, and he should have declared that he had a conflict of interest. But we don't know whether he has or not, because he hasn't abided by the rules in declaring his wife's financial position.
But can any Chancellor then have a partner with non-domiciled tax status, do you think?
Well, I personally think that at difficult times like this, when we're asking people to make as many sacrifices as they are, it is an odd thing for a Chancellor to be benefiting from his partner taking full advantage of the rules that are available there for them to be able to avoid paying a large amount of tax. That seems to me to be peculiar. And as I say, we don't know to what extent his family household has benefited from the decision that his wife made. But it is also the conflict of interest, which is very important.
We will see. We will see what further information may emerge from Number 11 at some point. But just finally on that topic, you will know how difficult it can be to govern when Number 10 Downing Street and Number 11 Downing Street do not get on. I think back to the TBGBs, when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were literally at each other's throats. If reports are to be believed, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor hate each other's guts by the looks of things right now. How long is that sustainable?
I think that there is a problem when we have a crisis like this, a crisis in terms of it's really affecting people's day-to-day, yeah? And we need to have proper leadership. And we need to be able to have a government that is making the right decisions in order to help people in the day-to-day. And when you have two men who are showboating and trying to show off, against one another and fighting one another, then clearly that sort of dysfunction means that they're not making any decisions, really, I don't think. I think that they could have proactively done many things in order to help with the crisis, but they haven't. We have said, obviously, that there should be a windfall tax with the fuel companies, the energy companies. They don't seem to have been able to focus on that. I mean, it's a really, really good idea, and it would help every family £600.
Well, the political parties have stolen good ideas from each other since.
We would welcome it. Let them steal it, but they won't even do that.
Emily Thornberry, lovely to have you in the studio. Thanks for joining us.